It's in a very, very remote place. It's very, very beautiful, as you see, with the mountains. So I thought I would just muse a little bit on what I do as a writer, as Decoding Trolls, and how I see my role as a writer and where my Substacks fit into it, what I'm working on now, what are my plans, and how you help me by responding and reading and reacting to my work. I wrote about N. Eduana, who is the first known author, named author in human culture. I discovered her in um, in a very forgotten corner of a museum in Brussels, where a poem, a song she had written to the moon god Nana in cuneiform text had been preserved. She lived around 2500 BCE, and she was the daughter of Sargon the Great, who was a great emperor down in Assyria and Babylon. And this particular song, which she had written to the moon god Nana, which was preserved in this forgotten corner of a museum in Brussels, had been written about or copied about 700 years after she died. But it was a little bit of a connection to her. And it really interested me that she was dedicated to the moon god Nana because, as you probably know by now, my hypothesis for why the MN sound is so common in the English language and Indo-European languages is that the MN sound is a remnant of what I call the moon-based metaphorical semantic signaling system that was implanted by the first Indo-Europeans and was so important to them that it became implanted in all of the daughter Indo-European languages. And as you may remember from my hypothesis about Osman the Great, who was the of all the Central Asians, Turkic language speaking Central Asians who came to Anatolia as part of the conquest, his name became part of the dynasty, the Ottoman dynasty in Osman. And my hypothesis was that since he and his dynasty arrived in Anatolia around 11 or 1200 years into the Common Era, and eventually conquered the whole area. However, as we saw from my work in the Hittite, and a year ago in the Ankara Museum, seeing Tarmana, his name written in a cuneiform text from about 1800 BCE. So 2,900 years before Osman the Great came, and modern day linguists use the MN sound, the uman suffix, and other suffix, but mainly the uman suffix, in these documents, in these 23,000 cuneiform texts written, found in a place I visited uh, the summer before last, uh, Kanesh, which was the actual and the mythological founding community for the Hittites, for the first Indo-European empire. And modern linguists use this uman suffix to distinguish between texts. All the texts are written in Assyrian, but there are local Anatolian, Indo-European words in there. And modern linguists use this uman suffix to distinguish the Assyrian, the Indo-European from the Assyrian. So then flash forward 2,000, um, 3,100 years later. So 3,000 years after these texts, Osman arrives here on his horse, Osman the Great, and founds the Ottoman Empire, which would rule Anatolia until the First World War, basically. So 3,000 years later, he arrives here with the MN sound. And then the first person who's appointed as a leader here is Menushur with an MN sound to replace the Armenians who have got the MN sound. And you begin to see the potential of Manuland to unite. Otherwise, we put a huge play in communities defined, in the differences between communities which are defined by different languages, and especially by different language families, particularly the Turkic language speaking family and Indo-European, say the Armenians. Uh, um, but actually, my conception in Manuland of Manuland is to unite us and unite the Turkic language speakers who today occupy this land and is replete with MN sounding names and words which they brought with them, or their ancestors brought with them from Central Asia when they first started arriving here in about 1,000 years ago. And that is a sign of how I see my job as a writer, is to not merely describe the world, but it's to intervene in the world and to try and make it right. This is what Enheduanna did in her dedications to the moon god Nana. She composed songs which were prayers, which were learned off by heart, and eventually they were recorded in cuneiform text so that I could see them. And that is a form of writing, of course. But the substance of what she did as the first known named author in human culture was independent of the form in which it was recorded and transmitted. And it's that substance I got to in this piece I wrote as part of my Decoding Trolls project, which is on recoupling the political right with moral rightness. And so I wrote a piece talking about how Maloney, MN, and Merz, President Zelensky in Ukraine, they have the potential and are actually doing it, where they're helping rescue the project that has been hijacked by the far right, who are doing very wrong things, as, for instance, President Trump threatening to invade Greenland and disturb the European Union and Greenland and the state of Denmark, Kingdom of Denmark's territorial integrity. And again, the writ is in there both. And this is very unright from a legal point of view, as defined by the post-World War II legal order, which makes territorial integrity as sacrosanct. But it's also wrong from a moral point of view, and I'm not afraid to say that. And the second element in the 6-element code of positive trolls, which I use to distinguish what is right from what is wrong, what is positive trolling from what is negative trolling, is ethical discipline. And that standard is basically set by the post-World War II legal order. And when, for instance, the current American government says it doesn't care about international law, or the far right talks about not caring about international law, droit, again, that right is in there, then I am not afraid to say that is wrong. That is unright. You are trying to usurp what is right and replace it. And my job as a writer and an artist, and the clue is in the writ element in writer, and also in artist, arta, in ancient Iranian, a Western language, means truth. And rata in Vedic, in ancient Indian language, also means truth. And so we have this idea of truth and what is right hardwired into these writ sounds. And my job as a writer, through whichever medium I use, I identify myself as a writer because in our culture, basically people doing what I do traditionally wrote. But of course, now I'm experimenting, as you see here, with video, with podcasts. I'm also doing my my website, which involves learning so that I'm completely independent and I can just write, I can just create, and then and be responsible for uploading it and putting into a form that you can read it, to complement my Substacks and the podcast platforms where my podcasts are, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, on X is where really most of my raw writing appears, but I do use images as well. So I'm not a pure writer in that traditional sense. But by learning these different mechanisms, these different mediums, these different media, and I'm ensuring that there is something unified about my content in terms of the Power of Mana, Finding Manuland project, the Decoding Trolls, more journalism, and then Dis and Folklore, which I'm very excited about as well, because this is the medium through which Donald and the far right are attempting to usurp and replace the post-World War II legal order with their vision of legal and social order, which is quite akin to the Nazis. And the Dis and Folklore, my Dis and Folklore as a narrative form that I have discovered and that I write about and help teach myself and embed myself and others to interpret data, the kinds of data we use before we decide who to vote for, or whether to go and demonstrate, or whether to participate in public life, whether to resist. Those kinds of decisions are made on the basis of data, and the very people who promote the idea of free speech are actually those who wish to shut it down, and turn what is wrong into what is right, and to suppress artists like me and other people, so that we can't communicate our truth and give an opportunity to others to hear how we interpret the world. And that is my job as a writer, and that's how I see myself. If I'm feeling pretentious, I'll call myself an artist, which kind of is takes in different media forms. But I'm happiest with being a writer, even though I am also creating content with video and learning, as you'll be seeing over the next year or two. You'll see how I develop my technical skills using these amazing technical facilities we have now with iPhones and what have you, and Substack itself. That as I develop my technical abilities into different formats and different forms, the substance of what I teach and what I have to write, it doesn't change. And it's all on this theme of trying to recouple what is right in a moral sense and a legal sense, as defined by the post-World War II legal order, with what is, and to point out when illusions, when what is not right is being promoted as being right by, say, the far right, where they have their anti-immigrant, anti-human rights rhetoric, pro-discrimination, anti and from my perspective, the Finding Manuland project and visits like this to places which are, as you see there, you can see in just across there, the watchtower, that's Armenia, the state of Armenia. And one day, hopefully, this border will be open and people will be able to flow freely again between these two countries, which have had such a complicated history. And hopefully, their shared heritage of the MN Sound. And once Russia is defeated finally and stops stirring the pot and provoking tumult, that we can find a more harmonious means of communicating with Turkic language speakers and Indo-European language speakers and Armenians and Turks and all the people living in Manuland and on the borders of Manuland, because we see that we have more in common with each other. We're more united. We're united by this MN sound and by its emanation from the first Indo-European language speakers in Mykolaiivka village in eastern Ukraine. and what I believe, my hypothesis being the moon-based metaphorical semantic signaling system that they embedded in our language, and which is still relevant today. And as far as I can see, is quite embedded in the Turkic language speaking. Of course, we don't really have written attestations of Turkic language until much later than Indo-European, maybe 3 millennia later. But we can certainly see in its imminence in, for instance, Osman the Great, in just to hear saying Menasher was the first viceroy of Ani when they conquered it. Emen is everywhere in Turkic language as well, and I think we can use these commonalities to promote harmony between different peoples, and that's partly what my Finding Manuland project is about, and it's completely consistent with my job as a writer.